Hi, I'm Mona Simpson. Welcome. Some of us meet here often for this Some Favorite Writers series, which I'd like to rename Our Favorite Writers, because what began as a way for me to bring my friends to UCLA and the Hammer Museum has ended up a great collaboration with our regulars, so that it feels like a large book club. But as those of you who are members of this putative book club know, it's very, very seldom that we bring a first-time writer, especially on the occasion of her first book. We would worry about filling this large auditorium, and it usually takes a while for word of a great book to get around. But Tara Westover and her memoir, Educated, are both exceptions and exceptional. I first came across the memoir when it was in manuscript and sent to me for a blurb. I was stunned by its originality, its revelation of an American life that felt real but completely untouched, untapped by literary representation. I was also impressed by the rare combination of gritty realism with a fairy tale ending that happened to be true. Needless to say, I gave it a blurb. The book hardly needed it. In fact, I urged Tara, even then, just in manuscript, to come to the Hammer to read for us, and to her immense personal credit, she has honored her commitment at a time after a year when institutions in our fair city are vying for her movie rights, and she's justifiably exhausted from enormous success. The Atlantic Monthly called Educated a one-of-a-kind memoir. Since then, it's been on the bestseller list for over a year. It was number one on the New York Times bestseller list, the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, and the Boston Globe list. It was President Barack Obama's 2018 summer reading pick. It was the number one Library Reads favorite of favorites pick. It was one of Oprah Magazine's 15 favorite books of 2018. It was one of the Times 10 best nonfiction books of 2018, one of Publishers Weekly's 10 best books of the year. It's already on the New York Times 100 best books, and I have no doubt it will be one of their 10 best books as well. I could go on and on and on. We don't have time to read all the credits of this marvelous book. Tara was 17 the first time she set foot in a classroom. After that first encounter with education, she pursued learning for a decade, graduating magna cum laude from Brigham Young in 2008, and subsequently winning a Gates Cambridge scholarship. She earned an MPhil from Trinity College, Cambridge in 2009. In 2010, was a visiting fellow at Harvard. She returned to Cambridge then, where she was awarded a PhD in history in 2014. Educated is powerful, moving, brave in its revelation of profound humiliations, and also in its admission of love for a community and background many of her readers might dismiss. It's the story of how she grew into herself, learned to distinguish the smell that pervaded her home, the myths she was brought up on, and the danger she just barely eluded. It would be a far less harrowing book if it were a novel. Please welcome Tara Westover.
Thanks, Mona, for that introduction. I'm going to read for a while for you. I'm going to read from a chapter that is the first chapter after I went to Cambridge. And I could try to explain where that fits in the story, but I'm not going to. So good luck. I'll just say I'm sort of suspended between two worlds of this. At this part. So I'm just going to start reading. I should also say it's really nice to be here. And thank you all for coming. I should start with that, but thank you. You'd think this was my first reading. Okay, here we go. This is chapter 30. A stone gate barred the entrance to Trinity College. Cut into the gate was a small wooden door. I stepped through it. A porter in a black overcoat and bowler hat showed me around the college, leading me through Great Court, the largest of the courtyards. We walked through a stone passageway and into a covered corridor whose stone was the color of ripe wheat. "This is the North Cloister," the porter said. "It is here that Newton stomped his foot to measure the echo, calculating the speed of sound for the first time." We returned to the great gate. My room was directly opposite, up 3 flights of stairs. After the porter left, I stood, bookended by my suitcases, and stared out my little window at the mythic stone gate and its otherworldly battlements. Cambridge was just as I remembered. Ancient, beautiful. I was different. I was not a visitor, not a guest. I was a member of this university. My name was painted on the door. According to the paperwork, I belonged here. I dressed in dark colors for my first lecture, hoping I wouldn't stand out. But even so, I didn't think I looked like the other students. I certainly didn't sound like them, and not just because they were British. Their speech had a lilting cadence that made me think of singing more than speaking. To my ears, they sounded refined, educated. I had a tendency to mumble, and when nervous, to stutter. I chose a seat around the large square table and listened as the 2 students nearest me discussed the lecture topic, which was Isaiah Berlin's 2 Concepts of Liberty. The student next to me said he'd studied Isaiah Berlin at Oxford. The other said he'd already heard this lecturer's remarks on Berlin when he was an undergraduate at Cambridge. I had never heard of Isaiah Berlin. The lecturer began his presentation. He spoke calmly, but moved through the material quickly, as if he assumed we were already familiar with it. This was confirmed by the other students, most of whom were not taking notes. I scribbled down every word. "So what are Isaiah Berlin's 2 concepts?" the lecturer asked. Nearly everyone raised a hand. The lecturer called on the student who had studied at Oxford. "Negative liberty," he said, "is the freedom from external obstacles or constraints. An individual is free in this sense if they are not physically prevented from taking action." I was reminded for a moment of Richard, who had always seemed able to recite with exactness anything he had ever read. "Very good," the lecturer said. "And the second?" "Positive liberty," another student said, "is freedom from internal constraints." I wrote this definition in my notes, but I didn't understand it. The lecturer tried to clarify. He said positive liberty is self-mastery, the rule of the self by the self. To have positive liberty, he explained, is to take control of one's own mind, to be liberated from irrational fears and beliefs, from addictions, superstitions, and all other forms of self-coercion. I had no idea what it meant to self-coerce. I looked around the room. No one else seemed confused. I was one of the few students taking notes. I wanted to ask for further explanation, but something stopped me. The certainty that to do so would be to shout to the room that I didn't belong there. After the lecture, I returned to my room, where I stared out my window at the stone gate with its medieval battlements. I thought of positive liberty and of what it might mean to self-coerce until my head thrummed with a dull ache. I called home. Mother answered. Her voice rose with excitement when she recognized my weepy, "Hello, Mom." I told her I shouldn't have come to Cambridge, that I didn't understand anything. She said she'd been muscle testing and had discovered that one of my chakras was out of balance. She could adjust it, she said. I reminded her that I was 5,000 miles away. "That doesn't matter," she said. "I'll adjust the chakra on Audrey and wing it to you." "You'll what it to me?" "Wing it," she said. "Distance is nothing to our living energy. I can send the corrected energy to you from here." "How fast does energy travel?" I asked. "At the speed of sound? Or is it more like a jetliner? Does it fly direct, or will it have to lay over in Minneapolis?" Mother laughed and hung up. I studied most mornings in the college library, near a small window. I was there on a particular morning when Drew, a friend from BYU, sent me a song via email. He said it was a classic, but I had never heard of it, nor of the singer. I played the song through my headphones. It gripped me immediately. I listened to it over and over while staring out at the North Cloister. "Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds." I scratched those lines into notebooks, into the margins of essays I was writing. I wondered about them when I should have been reading. From the internet, I learned about the cancer that had been discovered on Bob Marley's foot. I also learned that Marley had been a Rastafarian and that Rastafari belief in the whole body, and that Marley had been a Rastafarian, and that Rastafari believe in a whole body, which is why he had refused surgery to amputate the toe. 4 years later, at age 36, he died. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. Marley had written that line a year before his death, while an operable melanoma was at that moment metastasizing to his lungs, liver, stomach, and brain. I imagined a greedy surgeon with sharp teeth and long skeletal fingers urging Marley to have the amputation. I shrank from this frightening image of the doctor and his corrupt medicine, and only then did I understand, as I had not before, that although I had renounced my father's world, I had never quite found the courage to live in this one. I flipped through my notebook to the lecture on negative and positive liberty. In a blank corner, I scratched the line, "None but ourselves can free our minds." Then I picked up my phone and dialed. "I need to get my vaccinations," I told the nurse. I attended a summer on Wednesday afternoons where I noticed two women, Katrina and Sophie, who nearly always sat together. I never spoke to them until one afternoon a few weeks before Christmas, when they asked if I'd like to get a coffee. I had never gotten a coffee before. I had never even tasted coffee, because it is forbidden by the church, but I followed them across the street and into a cafe. The cashier was impatient, so I chose at random. She passed me a doll-sized cup with a tablespoon of mud-colored liquid in it, and I looked longingly at the foamy mugs Katrina and Sophie carried to our table. They debated concepts from the lecture. I debated whether to drink my coffee. They used complex phrases with ease. Some of them, like the second wave I'd heard before, even if I didn't know what they meant. Others, like the hegemonic masculinity, I couldn't get my tongue around, let alone my mind. I'd taken several sips of the grainy, acrid fluid before I understood that they were talking about feminism. I stared at them as if they were behind glass. I had never heard anyone use the word feminism as anything but a reprimand. At BYU, "You sound like a feminist" signaled the end of any argument. It also signaled that I had lost. I left the cafe and went to the library. After 5 minutes online and a few trips to the stacks, I was sitting in my usual place with a large pile of books, written by what I now understood to be second-wave writers, Betty Friedan, Germaine Greer, Simone de Beauvoir. I read only a few pages of each book before slamming it shut. I'd never seen the word vagina printed out, never said it out loud. I returned to the internet and then to the shelves, where I exchanged the books of the second wave for those that preceded the first, Mary Wollstonecraft and John Stuart Mill. I read through the afternoon and into the evening, developing for the first time a vocabulary for the uneasiness I'd felt since childhood. From the moment I had first understood that my brother Richard was a boy and that I was a girl, I had wanted to exchange his future for mine. My future was motherhood, his fatherhood. They sounded similar, but they were not. To be one was to be a decider, to preside, to call the family to order. To be the other was to be among those called. I knew my yearning was unnatural. This knowledge, like so much of my self-knowledge, had come to me in the voice of people I knew, people I loved. All through the years, that voice had been with me, whispering, wondering, worrying, that I was not right, that my dreams were perversions. That voice had many timbres, many tones. Sometimes it was my father's voice. More often it was my own. I carried the books to my room and read through the night. I loved the fiery pages of Mary Wollstonecraft, but there was a single line written by John Stuart Mill that when I read it, moved the world. It is a subject on which nothing final can be known. The subject Mill had in mind was the nature of women. Mill claimed that women have been coaxed, cajoled, shoved, and squashed into a series of feminine contortions for so many centuries that it is now quite impossible to define their natural abilities or aspirations. Blood rushed to my brain. I felt an animating surge of adrenaline, of possibility, of a frontier being pushed outward. Of the nature of women, nothing final can be known. Never had I found such comfort in a void, in the black absence of knowledge. It seemed to say, whatever you are woman. Thank you. Well, thanks.
Oh, that was wonderful. Let's talk a little about feminism.
Oh, what made you think of that?
No, it's interesting. How did you decide from what, in much of the book you're definitely telling it from your mature point of view, but you also managed to stay close to the age of the you that was. How did you manage that? That's always a tricky thing with memoirs, is getting the vividness of what happened with the intelligence of later.
Yeah. I'm not sure. It was easier when I was younger, when I was writing.
In the younger sections.
Yeah, I think the gap between who I was and who I had been was so obvious that those thoughts, I forget what it's called, but you're a proper writer, she probably knows, a free indirect speech, where you have something in there and it's not actually clear. Does the character say it or is the narrator who's saying this? I could do that in the child sections, and it was obvious where the thoughts were coming from because I was very different than I had been. But as I got older, that I had to be really careful about those. And in general, I would say I tried to just stay with the age that I was writing about. And then I hope at least that whenever there were serious departures, what I would almost think of as commentary from me as a writer or as the person narrating the story, that those were really clearly marked out. So I would try to say things like, thinking on it now, or as reflecting on it years later, because I really wanted it to be clear. And I tried not to do that a lot because I really wanted the story to be experiential. There were only a few moments where I felt like there is a particular kind of irony or poignancy here that needs a long view. And I can only draw it out by for a second stepping in and saying, I'm going to take over for 1 second.
Well, like one finds oneself wondering, what do you think of the term self-coercion now? Do you know what it means now? Does it make sense to you now? Because it also is kind of neat the way you did the parallelism of the kind of the pretension of the academic with the mother winging the energy to you. I mean, they were kind of nicely paralleled, actually.
Well, I really like parallels. When I was thinking about that chapter, I was thinking about... for me, the natural parallel of my mother winging the energy
is Bob Marley,
is Bob Marley, but it's also Newton.
Yeah.
So Newton is calculating the speed of sound, and then my mother, and we're kind
of... And so is she?
And I'm calculating, like, how long is this going to take based on these beliefs.
Can I get it by tomorrow morning?
Yeah, I'm thinking, how long will the headache last if she sends it now? And... No, I remember doing that, though, and really kind of thinking, I'm not sure this makes sense, but I kind of believed in it still because I'd been brought up that way. So, I think we all self-coerce. We all have these. No one is a completely free, independent thinker, but I think there are things that we have in our lives that are kind of the obvious things that are the hardest to let go. People ask me a lot if I think my family is a cult, and I always say I think every family is a cult, which I'm not sure is the answer they're looking for, but I really do think that.
That's interesting. That's very funny. What is it? Is it hard to talk about the book because it is a memoir? I think we were talking earlier, and you were saying we were complaining about the tyranny of print interviewers, but I was saying that for fiction writers, people are always accusing fiction writers of, in fact, writing veiled memoirs. But when you write a memoir, is it hard to talk about it because it's also it's your life? I mean,
That's interesting. I think at the beginning it really was, and I remember I was very nervous about trying to talk about it because writing about it is very different from talking about it.
Yeah.
And I thought, there's no guarantee that having done the one, I can do the other. And I was really, really worried about it. And my publicist said to me, "Oh, but it's all your life. You don't need to learn anything. You know it all. I mean, what are they going to ask you that you don't know the answer to?" But I wasn't worried that I wouldn't know the answer. I was just worried I would babble like an idiot, or I was worried I would say something. Actually, what I was worried about, and I'm going to just free associate. But I was worried because I had a tendency when I was talking about things that were hard to laugh. Anytime I talked about anything with my older brother, the darker it got, the more I would laugh. And the more the person talking to me would wonder, was I okay? Was I insane? Did I not understand that this was serious?
Was it sort of nervous laughter?
I think it was super nervous laughter, but I think nervous laughter is what it looks like. And what it really is self-defensiveness. Like you feel vulnerable and you don't like feeling vulnerable. So you try to brush it off and act like it's no big deal. So you come off as stronger, you think, but really you just come off as crazy. And I remember saying to my publicist, we have a much bigger problem than me forgetting things. They're gonna say to me something about my brother, and I'm gonna start talking about it, and I'm gonna laugh, and it's gonna be very bad. And they said, "Yeah, you can't do that, like ever." And I said, I can't not do it, so I don't know what your plan is.
That's almost worse to say, yeah. You can't ever.
And then they put their brains together for a little while, and they came back and said, okay, we have a solution. You know, if you're on TV and this happens, you have to stop the interview, and you have to explain what you're doing.
Oh, that's smart. Did you do that?
Yeah. You know what? It never happened.
Oh, that's
because I practiced stopping and saying, okay, I'm sorry. I know it sounds crazy that I've just laughed just now. I do understand that this is serious, but you have to realize I'm very uncomfortable. I'm not good at talking about this. This is, I feel kind of exposed and I'm laughing. And so as long as you take people with you, it's fine.
That's really interesting.
But kind of having that out kind of took off a lot of the pressure. Because I thought if I start doing something crazy, all I need to do is know that I'm doing it and stop and explain. And then you're having a conversation about what it's like to deal with that and going forward and whatever. You're kind of off the topic, and it gets a lot of the pressure off because you've already said.
And
this is
you're
difficult.
just it's honest. It's kind of
and it was completely
honesty.
True. But it was weird because it was as soon as they said that, it was like having that kind of cord I could pull. It just never happened.
I remember when I first talked to you long ago. We were talking about what you might do next, and you were saying, well, people were telling you should write fiction. You were thinking of fiction, but now you don't seem to be going in that direction. Talk about what you're doing next. It's a really exciting thing because the book ends it does end younger than you are now, but
not a
lot. I mean, it kind of takes you up to where you are. So,
like, I was writing the book. I started writing the book before the books that happened at the end happened.
Yeah.
So it was pretty. Went right up to the end. There is a scene at the end of the book. So what I'm doing now, I'm working on a documentary and maybe a podcast and who knows what else about rural education and specifically how rural kids do post-high school and college or trade schools or whatever they choose to do.
Talk a little more about that.
I got interested in it because of there's a scene at the end of the book. There was a where do I even start with this? There was a guy that I dated when I was 17 who made this huge difference to my life, and everyone thought he was going to be this superstar. He was student body president. He was captain of the football team. He got straight A's. He was. I got in touch with him when I was at Harvard, and it turned out he was working the oil rigs in Montana, and that just really surprised me. And so I started looking into it and found out that statistically a lot of rural kids, even really smart, kind of high-achieving kids, really struggle in college. So I got kind of interested in that phenomenon and went back to my hometown. And before I even wrote Educated and did a lot of interviews, I actually interviewed the entire graduating class the year I would have graduated if I'd gone, which was pretty awkward. Hey, I'm that kid you never met because I didn't go to school. And how was your divorce? Like, it was great. But actually it was really interesting, and I started learning a lot about my life was not like their lives, and their lives were not like mine. And so it was interesting to go back to my town where I was from there, and I knew the culture very well, but I didn't know anything about the high school. I'd never even been to it. And kind of figuring out what was their education like, and why was that transition, why is it so, why does that transition not seem to be working as well as it possibly could be? If you think of education as this access point, we have a country right now that is politically divided, but it's largely divided along urban and rural lines. That's one of the defining divisions of our whole politics. And to think of something like education that I think should be an access point between the two worlds, you should have a lot of different people, different kinds of people coming together. For some reason, it's not working for rural kids. It's super not working for them. And so I'm kind of interested in that.
You write really vividly in Educated about your transition to Brigham Young and the roommates and the cultural disparity, even, between your family's brand of Mormonism and their much more, mainstream Mormonism. What was the difference in your? How would you compare your experience of college with the people from your high school who went and somehow found themselves unable to continue or not wanting to continue?
I experienced culture shock that had to be greater than their culture shock, because I was like, what's an essay, But I don't know, maybe it helped me because I never assumed I knew anything. I don't think I figured out that you were supposed to graduate from college till I'd been there like 2 years. And then I realized that people I knew were leaving and they were saying they were graduating. And I was like, what does that mean? You mean I have to leave in 2 years? And they said, well, hopefully. And I don't think I did not understand what college was. I was just there. But in a way, I think knowing that I didn't know anything was maybe kind of helpful.
Well, and do you think it might have had something to do also with the they might have had more visible alternatives in their community?
I do think that's true. I think a lot of rural kids, they don't have role models. They don't know anyone who has a college degree. And I was helped a lot. I had professors take a specific interest in me. I don't know why my life turned out differently than theirs, and I don't know as though I feel like statistically you can say that it's a valuable, it could be something genetic. It could be just that I got a specific help that I needed. A sample of one is not necessarily useful. But I think it could be useful in the sense of, I think for kids who've grown up in a more urban environment where you've just grown up with people who have degrees, you can see the different jobs they have, it's kind of impossible to imagine what it's like to not know something. You just kind of forget. I had this, I thought this today actually, because I've been to LA one other time in my life. And I came when I was a graduate student. It was when I was at Cambridge, a couple years into my time at Cambridge. I came to LA to take a test. I think McKinsey Insight, it said, if you pass this test, we'll take you to Switzerland. And I was like, I will do anything for free, anything, basically. It's like, so they said, you have to take this test. And I said, okay. So I was in Salt Lake, and they flew me to Los Angeles. And I had never in my life taken a taxi. I didn't know that was a thing. I must have seen them in movies. Like, it's obvious to me now that you would just take a taxi. I didn't. Somehow I just panicked. I thought, how do I get around this place? There doesn't seem to be public transport here. And I remember I was on Facebook like for several hours till I found this woman that I had met like 4 years before, who was now living in LA, who I then wrote to and said, do you have a car? I'm desperately in need of help. Can you drive me around?
That's funny.
And she said, yeah, who are you again? And she did. She picked me up. She took me to the test. She took me back to the airport.
Oh, is she here? What a nice woman.
She's an extremely nice woman. But, thinking back on that now, it's like the obvious.
Well, it's such an interesting
How many movies have I seen where people got in cabs? Like, did I not understand that I could also get in a cab? Like, clearly
the
not.
Interesting disparity sort of, and then you went on Facebook to figure out how to do it. Like
there was
you
problem
didn't know about
solving.
Taxis, but you were already an adept at Facebook.
Yeah, but like that kind of thing where it's like now
this cognitive dissonance.
I know how to do this, but even then I was a graduate student at Cambridge.
Yeah.
Could not arrive at a major metropolitan city and get a cab. Like, that was way beyond my abilities.
Do you still find things like that? I mean, do things
No.
pop up? No. No, I meant.
I mean, I learned who Tupac was last week, but, like, I know how to get a cab. Like,
No, that. But I find that there are strange things from one's past that still pop up all the time.
yeah, that's true. But I can navigate.
I'm fascinated by the idea of this podcast about the rural education and just the differences between rural life in America. How many of you in the audience, will people raise their hands if they grew up in a rural environment? So not so many, really, but some. I mean, it's a fascinating subject. I grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and most of the kids I went to school with did not go to college.
How big is Green Bay?
Green Bay at the time I was growing up there was about 150,000. Now it's probably about 400,000. But still, the economics are such that you wouldn't necessarily expect that kids, at least the high school I would have gone to, I moved before high school, but most kids I grew up with did not go to college. And I imagine it's that way a lot of places. But the last time I was there visiting, for example, I went to a health food store right around the corner from my hotel, and the woman who worked there, son had gone to college, the local college. And after he was finished with college, the only job he could get was refilling the vending machine of candy, which seemed to me, obviously a job you could have gotten without that degree. So how are you, tell us about just how you're going to do this.
Well, I think you make an interesting point, which is having to do with, the question of whether people have to go to college is a really good question. And
Especially
I would say,
now with the MOOCs and the...
Yeah, but I would say, with rural areas, for a long time, I just don't think it wasn't an important step, and it still might not be a crucial step, but it wasn't needed in the sense that most kids, kids I would interview would say to me, I never thought about what I was going to be when I grew up. I thought about what kind of farmer I was going to be when I grew up, but I never thought about whether I was going to be a farmer. It's just like, potatoes or something else. And, but I think the economy has changed so much in the last 20 or 30 years. And farming, now you'll get the same number of people will be farming, that used to farm 160 acres will be farming 6,000 acres, the same number of workers.
So many fewer farmers then.
Way fewer farmers. And then you have a situation that has only been true for the last 15 or 20 years in the United States for the first time. Rural towns are shrinking in absolute terms, not just relative to cities, but in absolute terms they're shrinking. And that just means economically people cannot stay then. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy almost, because there aren't as many jobs for the next generation, more leave. And so the systems that used to work, the agriculture, that whole way of life is changing. So a lot of the kids that I would talk to, they kind of, they didn't necessarily want to live in a city, but they kind of knew if they were going to have any kind of economic future, they might have to at least move, to Logan or Salt Lake City or something. And so they were trying to do that, but it wasn't necessarily something they wanted to do. They kind of liked, for the most part, they liked living in a rural area.
So
that's
it's
what
really
they would have preferred.
your generation that this landed on in the last 15 years.
It's happening now. I think their parents are okay, and the kids are trying to figure out. My brother Richard said this to me recently. He said, if you grow up in a city, you don't need to know how to live in the countryside. You don't need to know that. Increasingly, if you grow up in the countryside, you do need to know how to function in a city. And that is it's just difficult for them. I think it's difficult for them to navigate through the system, which is very bureaucratic. I think it is more geared towards an urban audience. There's a lot of assumptions about the way people think and work that are just not well suited for rural kids.
Do you see yourself as a cultural translator of sorts?
Only because there's not anyone else doing it, really. But if there was anybody better, I feel like there's so few people from rural areas that are everything I see about rural life or rural people in media, news, whatever, to me is such a caricature. I'm just like, where do they find these people? Like, I don't
So
recognize them at
interesting.
all. Everyone in my hometown, they're all very right wing. They love Donald Trump, but they are not any different from anybody here, really. Like, you just wouldn't. You could talk to them for quite a while and not think there's anything different about them. In fact, the number one thing I noticed moving between urban and rural areas, or red places and blue places, is that actually most pro-Trump areas don't really ever talk about Donald Trump. Whereas in New York, they talk about nothing else, like nothing else, and so it's a huge difference. But I guess what I see so often represented is, 40% of the country voted for the man, and then 1% maybe of those, or 0.1%, go to rallies, and then of those people, maybe 10% are the really crazy ones that make it on the news, and then that becomes the caricature that we have of what everyone is like. And I don't recognize those people that I see represented. So I feel like there needs to be more of a, I do think that probably more than any single law or policy or ideology or any politician even, I think the fact that the two Americas have no ability to communicate or understand each other, and those cleavages that we used to have where people knew people who lived differently than they do, all of that is gone. And we're like hermeneutically sealed apart from each other. I think that's probably a much bigger problem than any individual politician.
I feel like what you're saying is certainly true of urban America. I mean, I feel like what we get of rural America is certainly caricatured and stereotyped and unnuanced and just broad and wrong. Is it that way the other way too? Do you feel that rural America has a very slanted idea of, is it what we read in the media that they think, or what?
It's slanted, like politically, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Their ideas about what liberals are like are extreme. But I do think the urban audience, because almost every movie that you've ever seen is set in a city. I mean, if you think about the movies that are set in rural areas,
even if they're set in rural areas, they're made by city directors.
They're made by city directors,
actors, city writers.
Yeah, but even if you think of the movies you've seen that are set in rural areas, and I dare you to find 10 that aren't like, this is a murder mystery and we're gonna set it. Like,
Days of Heaven.
Find me, but there's very few. I mean, there's just an extreme few, and even Days of Heaven is like it's like way back in the day. It's like.
It's a little back in the day.
But it's depicting a time even further back in the day.
Yeah,
like, it's not even so much rural. It's like back when the frontier was still
murder,
expanding.
It's nostalgia.
Yeah, but it's like that's about frontier life more than rural. Yeah. That's like more. But anyway, I think so. I guess it's.
There's a nice new one called, which is based on a Richard Ford novella, which is called Wildfire. Quite good.
I haven't seen that, but I'll believe you.
Or is it called Wildlife? Wildlife, I'm sorry. But so now, how are we going to? How have you decided that the podcast is the? I mean, one wants to dissolve those stereotypes and broad stroke views of the other, and I think a podcast is a good vehicle for doing that. Do you think how else can that be achieved?
I don't know. Do you have any ideas?
I don't know. I wanted to ask you about education, about the rural education.
Wow, you didn't even take a bat. You just like.
Well, here's what I think. I think. I don't know. I mean, I like you writing more books like this, but.
I've only had the one life, and it went right up till the end.
Well, you're still living.
I don't think writing about a book tour would be very interesting.
No, you'll have to leave out the book tour year. Start, next year. But no, I think one other question I had about the rural education, which is really interesting, is there's sort of two aspects of education. One is the real purpose of education. What we love about education is what you actually learn. But I teach at UCLA. There are lots of California rural kids who come to UCLA because, the UC system is still one of the great idealistic things in the world, that you can be a poor kid in California and get here and still afford it. But I will say that a lot of kids come from the Central Valley and they major in philosophy, English, history, any of the things we cherish. And that's not what their families hope for them or even what they, in a way, want for themselves because they have no family security, they have no money, they have student loans, they need a job. So there's this sort of economic stamp that education gives, and then there's this other thing. And so, I mean, I'm wondering how that's all going to play out. I mean, I'm wondering what people, I don't know. I mean, I think probably one of the real, maybe one thing that will change real education is that jobs aren't going to be as plentiful for 18-year-olds.
You're coming with the hard policy questions
I
here,
don't know.
you know. No, I will say one thing about that. What will I say about that? I think education is those two things. It's meant to help you get a better job. It's meant to fit you for this great life. But it's also meant to be this other, more idealistic thing. It's meant to be this process of learning how to think. I think of it as almost a process by which you discover a sense of self, I think, and learn to trust in yourself and learn to try to think independently.
And just stop coercing yourself in ways you didn't even know.
And coercing others. So I think I think education is...
Or to better coerce others, depending on the education.
Hush you. So I think education is that ideal thing. But I would say this. The problems you're talking about with jobs, that has to do with globalization, that has to do with inequality, that has to do with technological unemployment. And those problems have nothing to do with education, really. I mean, those are political problems, those are social problems, and we have looked to the education system to solve them. And the more that we try to make the education system solve these problems that are not pedagogical but are social and political, I think the less education is education, the more we reduce it to something a little bit more like job training, because we're so desperate to solve our social problems. There aren't enough jobs, so every education itself has to become part of the rat race to try to... And I think it is an impoverishing way of thinking about what education is. I mean, I'm really grateful. Thank you. I was taught how to use Excel, not at BYU, but by a really well-intentioned boyfriend after I left BYU. I had to learn how to make a website for myself, which I could not have done, I think, without probably some skills I acquired at college. And I had to take statistics. I had to take some, Stuff. Yeah, I took some science. And I'm grateful for that. I'm really glad that I learned that. I think that's part of what an education is. But I think if we do allow education to become reduced to job training, if we think about what we lose there, if we do take out the history and the art and the philosophy and all those bits of self-discovery, for my own life, teaching me Excel or how to code wouldn't have had the effect that it had. For me, it was this transformational thing. I could live a very different life. I could choose a different life. Teaching me Excel would not have had that effect.
No. And one imagines even if your circumstances weren't good, even if there weren't a good outcome, you would still be grateful for that because you can live more in your mind. I could go on forever asking Tara questions, but I know there's a bunch of book clubs here tonight. And I know you're all going to have a lot of questions too. I just wanted to say one thing. I was excited to know that there were a lot of book clubs, and some people at the Hammer would love to. We would love to start a book club. So we're hoping we'll get some questions from book clubs and the rest of you too. But also, if any of the book clubs would like to, please do shoot an email to the Hammer, to programs at the Hammer Museum, and we will follow up with that. We have some people with mics in the audience, so raise your hands for questions and they will come to you. And please do wait for the microphone because we tape these sessions.
Hello, thank you. I've read your book and I found it astonishing, absolutely astonishing. I'm not rural, I'm from Brooklyn, but I came from a somewhat impoverished or simple background. I became a doctor and I've lived a different life. But there were so many medical things in your book that were astonishing.
Yeah, that's very true.
I do want to ask, though, how has your family reacted to your book?
Probably about the way you'd expect. I think is probably the best answer to that I could give. There have been some surprises. My aunts and uncles were a lot more supportive than I was expecting them to be, which was a really delightful surprise. But by and large, the way you'd expect them to.
Can you say a little bit more? Because that's such a good question about the medical aspects of your book.
What specifically?
What about your mother's? I was curious about your mother's curatives. Do you have any belief in them at all? I kind of did.
She's good with burns. I mean, she's legit with the burns. Yeah, if I had a burn, I would get a hold of some of that salve. I absolutely would do that. I don't know. There were things she did that I cannot explain. They definitely. She could give your toes a massage and make your sinuses drain.
Wow.
Like while she was doing it. I don't know what that is, but.
And this is all post-traumatic head injury.
She did a little of that. She calls it foot zoning before I think and after. Yeah. So she had these skills, but then there was stuff that she did that I didn't think worked at all.
The energy sense.
The energy stuff I never had, and you'd have a lot of that. Diagnosing something really, really serious, like you're having kidney failure, and then give you some herbs for a week, and like, oh, thank God we fixed that. And you're just like, was anything ever wrong? I'm not sure. I felt fine the whole time. So
cured your cancer.
Yeah, like they have a tendency to say they've had cancer and then cure it, and then I'm just not sure. I'm just like, I don't know. Did you have cancer? Because they never get it tested. They test it themselves, which to me is different. And so I don't know. I think you could put me down as a skeptic, but then they have done. I think some of what they do definitely works, and I am a solid believer when it comes to burns. I mean,
Thank you. Next question.
Thank you so much. Hi. I feel like I sold so many of your books to all my friends. My daughter and my husband read the book to each other over the last couple of months.
These are the two wonderful producers I was telling you about.
I really, really loved
Helen
the book.
Bartlett and Tony Bell.
Oh, so sweet, Mona. Great questions, Mona. I felt such an incredible sense of home, your longing for home. The book continually goes back to describe what it was like to be in that place. Do you still have that ache for where you grew up? And if not, what is that new home for you?
I think I do, but I think there were a lot of years it was an ache in that sense of just pain and sadness that I didn't have it anymore, and maybe even anger, probably a little dose of shame in there. But I think now I think about it, and it's just a nice thing. I'm glad I had it for as long as I did, and I don't have it anymore. But I'm just grateful that I was able to have a home that was beautiful, that was so meaningful to me, that had been in my family, that had so much symbolism and calm and grace, and beauty, even if there were also these other kind of elements of chaos. So I don't know what the new sense of home is. I'm still working on that, but I don't feel unanchored, I guess. But yeah, I did feel that ache for a long time, and I think it's changed now to be something that is more pleasant than painful.
I also found your book very powerful and also horrifying, hard to read because of the neglect and the danger. That thank God you all survived. I wonder. I thought it was very interesting the section that you chose to read. And what you said about positive liberty, being able to free yourself from myths and addictions and whatever. What do you think enabled you to do that when so many people are not able to, even if they don't come from as difficult a background as you did? Do you think there's any connection to what you experienced that gave you the strength? Or
I think there's probably a lot of areas in my life I haven't done that with. I think we all are self-coercing or living with fictions we choose, and I don't think you can fully get yourself out of that. So I don't know why that one was something that in some ways, I guess I feel like it wasn't a choice I had. I mean, I was put into a very specific conflict with my parents, and it was so gradual. I was just going to do this one little thing they didn't really want me to do, and I was going to go to BYU, but I was just going to study music, so it was okay. And then I was going to not study music, but it's not like I was going to do anything really awful. And then I was like, well, Cambridge seems kind of interesting. And so it was kind of gradual, and then there was this conflict with my brother and my parents, and once that came out, that was only going to end the one way. And I guess, it could have ended with me kind of collapsing in on myself and denying everything and going back, but I kind of feel like that choice wasn't one I ever would have chosen to have to make. My parents chose to have me make that choice, and I could just deal with that choice or not. So I guess I don't know. I wouldn't say that I have the secret to self-actualization, or that I know how to completely intellectually liberate yourself. I don't feel completely intellectually liberated. I find myself repeating things all the time that when people say, where did you get that information? I'm like, somewhere dodgy. When I really think about it, somewhere super dodgy. So I don't consider myself intellectually liberated, but I did feel like we have powerful stories that we tell ourselves about obligations that we have to certain people. And specifically, I think we have a culture that quite rightly in some cases really discourages selfishness in ways that I think can make it hard for some people to find a healthy way to practice self-love. I think for some people that narrative of family loyalty is great because their families are functional. And then for some people, I think it becomes a mechanism of self-negation. And so I felt like I could only really write about the one kind of actualization that I'd experienced, not even because I chose it, just because it happened to me. And I was lucky enough to have the tools because of the education I'd had, because of the opportunity I had, because of the friendship I had. Education defined in the absolute broadest sense. But I wouldn't say that I know the secrets for everybody. I wish.
I come from a very, very large city, 10 times the size of your city, Buell, Idaho. Question is, are you still religious, and are you still Mormon?
I am not Mormon. I have a lot of respect for Mormonism, but I stopped practicing, when did I guess about a year or two after I got to Cambridge, I think. For me, I started to feel like, Mormonism has the chapter that I just read is a lot about definitions, at least the last bit about the definitions that people give you of what you're like. And Mormonism, more than most religions, has pretty strong ideas about what gender is like and what the roles are. And for me, I didn't think they were bad definitions. I didn't think they were bad roles. I knew people living in them who were very happy. But I felt like I had to contort myself in order to adhere to those. And I was moving into a phase of my life where I didn't necessarily want to be contorting myself anymore or saying things about myself that I wasn't sure I really believed. So even though I had a lot of respect for Mormonism, it didn't feel quite right to me.
I guess we're doing sort of one side, the other side.
Hi. Of the many moments with your parents that stood out to me reading this, One that I often go back to is when you were working with your dad and you wanted to use gloves, and he said that eventually your hands would develop calluses. And I was so impressed when they did, and you could actually handle what he was throwing at you. And in a strange way, I kind of admire that self-reliance because it's something that I didn't really grow up with, where if you needed something, you could go get that. And I wonder, now that you are so assimilated to, I think, mainstream culture, I wonder if you've been able to maintain what you learned from your parents in a positive way.
I hope so. I'm not sure, but I really, really hope so. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I still find city life kind of weird. Like, I think there's something about the way I was brought up.
And she lives in New York City.
I live in New York, and like, there's all these people, and they're right there all the time. I mean, there's more people in my building than in my whole town. It's so weird. So, yeah, I hope so, but I also would just hope, I don't want to, I mean, I like New York very much, but I don't think I could spend the rest of my life there. And weirdly enough, if I didn't have just even my dog, I have a ridiculous dog, but I have a dog. And I find that just so, it just reminds you that, I don't know, dogs are just so, all this weird stuff. If people get together and they make all these weird rules and they obsess over strange things, they decide that some people are really great and other people aren't very great, and that this is the right place to live and these are the right clothes. Dogs don't care about any of that. Like, they're just like, they care about whether they're warm, hungry, and whether you're petting them.
And whether they're loved.
Yeah, like, that's what they care about, and that is their list, pretty much. And I just find it very, I find animals for me are very restorative of that. Just this very different way of living. If we could just get out of all the weird social talking about things that we put into our heads. This is what's important, and this is a way of thinking, and just the rat race mentality of all these things that we think are important. Leo, that's my dog's name. I don't know what I would do without him in my life, because you come in and you just realize what matters is, like, are we having a nice day?
They're far superior. There's no question.
Hi, my name is Jana, and I think your book is amazing. It's groundbreaking. And your relationship with your mother, in particular, seems to follow some of the feminists that you mentioned, particularly the last, that it's quite impossible to define their aspirations. Your mother seemed to have to go back and forth between liberation on some level, and then she would go back to agreeing with your father and abandoning you and it feels like she had always sort of rebelled and then rescinded, and you are the ultimate product of her rebellion on some level. And then your use of, or your love of, or description of Princess, the mountain, seems to me, when you've been sort of ultimately freed, it's sort of like you've been hewn from the princess, and now you're your own thing. But in the end, I feel like your mother, part of her, wanted that to happen.
I think that's astute. I mean, my mom, I always said there were two versions of my mom. There's who she was when she was with me, and then there's who she was when she was with my dad. And they were not the same person. I thought of them for a long time. There's like my mother, and then there's my father's wife. They are different people. It's something I've thought a lot about, which is sometimes people give you a gift, and then later they take it away. And if it's a physical gift, then you don't have it anymore. But there are gifts that people give you, and even if later they recall them, you still have them. And, my mother gave me a lot of gifts like that later she wanted not to have given me. but I still have them. And that's true of my dad, too. I mean, my dad I remember there was a line when I was revising the book. I'd written the bones of the book, and then I was adding, you go through and you revise it. You try to make it less horrible, and then you try to make it good. And and there was a line that I was typing along about the bit about my dad wanting me to sing and how much he liked hearing me sing. And I wrote this line that says, he wanted my voice to be heard. And that's true. He did. I don't think he particularly wants it now, but he did. And he gave me tools and wanted me to be in front of people and wanted me to have that sense of confidence in myself. Like, he wanted that for me for a moment. And maybe later he didn't want it, but he did want it at one time. And my mother did the same thing. She did things for me that were self-sacrificing, that were important, that were really wonderful. And then later, because of her own duress, her own situation, tried to take it back. But, when I think of my mother, I would say this. When I think about my mother, when I think to myself, should I go home for Christmas? I think of my father's wife. And I think, no, I probably should not do that. And when I'm just thinking of her, I think of my mother. And I'm happy.
There was almost a superhuman physiology about the men in your family. And that superhuman quality was, for many of us, awe-inspiring. That they could have so much physical damage and still manage to survive and do it so independently. And I'm trying to figure out how that could possibly happen and how you understand that.
I'm trying to think how to explain that. I have two memories. We had an attic. We had an old barn that was going to fall down, and for some reason it never did. And then on the top floor, there were the beams that run across, and they were about 3 or 4 feet. And they're just beams running. And I remember we used to play tag up there, and you just run straight across them to play tag. That's how we played tag. And it was about a 20-foot drop. And I remember the first time I went up with my siblings to do this, I thought, this is insane. Like, I was like 4. And I couldn't do it, and I was terrified. And then I have now in my head thousands of memories of playing tag. Like, I did that. You just grow into it. And I think if you grow up that way, we were very good at not falling, and we were very good at falling. There's a way that you learn to fall and protect the important parts. So I just think if you grow up that way, I think that you could take my brothers and you could drop them from a pretty intense height and they would be okay. I do. I feel like I would be too. There's one thing I know how to do, and it's how to fall off things. And get thrown off things and have things fall at me. All of that. I think that it's just a skill. It's an instinct that you have. And I wouldn't be as good at it now as I was. That's the reality. But I think I would be, better at it than some people. And I think it's a physicality. Like, athletes know this. Anybody who spends, you spend so much time, it's like another sense. So, but it's not, I say the attic thing because it's not like you're just born with it. I mean, I remember going up there and just, what are we doing? Like, there's nails down there. If I fall, I will die. And then by the time I was 7, never thought about it again.
I'm curious about now. I mean, I loved your book, and that's why I'm here. But coming from that world into the world of education and achieving your PhDs and all of that, and then writing this book. I don't know exactly how long it took you to write it, but was it a survival mechanism? Did you have to write it? Was it an essay and somebody said, make this into a memoir? I don't know the trajectory, but I would like to know that. But I'm curious about now. Your book is a huge success. You're still very young. Are you intimidated by your success? Do you wonder what your next book is going to be about? Do you need to write another book? How is it to be you?
I don't know if I needed to write it, but I just don't know. It's easy for me to imagine not having written it. I had professors say to me, even at BYU and then at Cambridge, you've had kind of a weird life, maybe you should write a memoir. And I didn't want to at all. I was completely not interested in that. I don't think I was interested in it in any kind of serious way until I was a good way through the estrangement process. And then I started thinking about how I'd had this strange experience with education and I wanted to write about education. But more than that, I started thinking about just the isolation that I had felt when I was going through that. And there are stories about families out there, but none of them resonated with me. They weren't how I felt. I felt like you had a lot of, yes, families go through hard times, but love conquers all and reconciliation is always the goal. And that was one thing that wasn't helping me as much. And then you had people who seemed to have more kind of monochromatic ideas about their lives, where maybe they'd gone so far down the healing process that they just, I guess, I don't know how you'd really categorize them, but people for whom the situation, they could just see, oh, that was horrible, it was abusive, I never want to go anywhere near that again. And I just didn't identify with either of those. I needed a story that would sort of say, I love my family. I really, really miss them. I think they're good people, and I need to get the hell away from them. Like, that was the story that I needed. And I didn't find stories for me about abuse that captured how kind people could be and how those relationships could be so compelling because the love was real. It wasn't fake. It wasn't a trick. There were really amazing qualities that my brother had, that my mother had, that my father had. So that the loss of those relationships was a real loss. And I didn't find that. Maybe I missed it. It's everywhere, but I didn't find it. And so that intersection between what my education was and what my family story had been, and kind of realizing that in a lot of ways they were the same story, made me think, well, maybe I will write this book. In terms of the next book, I've had people say that. I've had people say to me, what if you write a book and it doesn't do as well as this book? And I'm planning on that being the case. I'm over it already.
I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment that having been raised in a third world country decades ago, I resonated a lot with a lot of what you wrote and what we're talking, and the distinction between rural and urban as opposed to a whole different individualistic as opposed to communal life. A lot of parallel in that, and I really appreciated you articulating them, conceptualizing them, and I guess my struggle has been to integrate the two, and I see that you dropped one, and I can't.
Interesting. I don't know if I could say I really dropped them. I've drawn some pretty strong boundaries. There would never come a day if my mother called me and needed something that I wouldn't answer. That wouldn't happen. I still feel like those relationships are important and inescapable in some sense. I don't really believe in disownment in the way that you say that they were never. I think in some ways I kind of live in this eternal present where even if I have a fight with someone or a falling out with someone, I kind of remember, well, there's this old version of me that really cared for them. So there's people that maybe you don't love anymore, but you remember loving, and that has to mean something. And I wouldn't even say it with my own family. I do love them, but I also remember loving them. So I don't know. So I feel like I could drop the one, but I have had to find a way that the individual could survive with the collective. And for me, that had to mean redefining it and renegotiating it in a way that I could actually live through it. But no, I don't think I could ever drop them completely. I don't think there's ever going to be I hope there's never a version of me that forgets I'm my mother's daughter.
Also, you're young. It's good change.
Hi. I think you're probably tired, but I'm a stranger. I loved your book. But I was struck by a part toward the end. You're struggling at Harvard, and you're binge watching Buffy. And it's something we've all done. You've gone through these amazing accomplishments and survived these death-defying things, and you're binge watching Buffy. And as a writer who makes choices about stuff, it worked very well in the story to bring you down to the level of us normal humans. But I was surprised at that point you included that part of your life. Could you talk about that a little bit, that part of your life?
I'm just a big Buffy fan. No, I really am. I'm a huge Buffy fan. And I watched a lot of it at Cambridge. And so when I was thinking about, which of the 90 million hours of television that I watched in that period of extreme ill mental health, which what do I really want to focus on or showcase here? Buffy seemed like the natural choice. I also just think the show, I don't know, that image of supernatural, I just liked it. I mean, I wasn't allowed to watch Buffy when I was a teenager, but, that's the spiritual and the mundane. Like, it's a very vulgar version of supernatural and all the rest of it. And I think I just liked the contrast. And it's Buffy the Teenage Vampire Slayer. And there's like a lot of heavy things happening in the book in that moment. And I just kind of liked, we're going to put in this, like, yeah. But mostly I'm just a fan.
So having lost your family really at this point, do you see, it's a two-part question, do you see the possibility of ever having a reunification with them at some point in the future? And two, have you created your own family with other people at this point?
So the reunification one, I'm not sure. I think one of the hard things about estrangement is that you don't know the future, which is kind of why I wanted to write the book when I was younger. I feel like a book about estrangement that's written when you're older is going to be a good book and useful, but will be capturing a really specific experience, because I just think it feels different at the end of your life than it does at the beginning or the middle. And so I don't know what will happen. And I tend to think, some people read the book and they see we're definitely going to reconcile, and some people read the book and they think that will never happen. And I have always just imagined that has a lot more to do with them than it does with me. And I'm okay with that. I don't have any pictures of my family in the book. And part of that's because they're living and I want to protect their privacy, but part of it is, if people want to imagine my mother as their mother, my father as their father, that's fine. That's what stories are for. And it doesn't need to be my life exactly that people are interacting with or experiencing. It can be their lives. And I didn't want anything that would be in the way of them doing that. And that goes for the ending as well. I suspect that whatever ending people imagine probably has a lot more to do with what they hope or want for themselves than it does with what will happen with me. And the second part, depends on what you mean. I mean, I have very good friends, but I don't have children. So I have a dog. He's pretty good.
Hi, my dad and I are a big fan of your book. I'm writing an essay I'm in senior year of high school on your book. And I've noticed a symbol that has come up from the beginning and then kind of middle way to the end is the symbol of you looking in the mirror and seeing first what, your impression of a whore was to a woman. So just talking about that.
Yeah. I am interested in the ways that we let people define us to ourselves. I think is probably the most. There's all kinds of ways that people can make your world smaller or dimmer, but I think that way where they tell you what you are is probably the worst. So there's a line when I was writing the book, I was flipping through my journals, and I didn't read all of them because I can't. There's nothing actually worse than being forced to read your journals from when you were 15. I just I don't wish this on anybody. But there was a line that I had written after a really difficult interaction with my brother where I had said, it's strange how we give the people we love so much power over us. And I do think it was that sense of definition. He had made it so that when I saw myself, I saw what he saw. And I think a lot of what I think education is learning how to see yourself through your own eyes and not through this weird ways that other people have defined you or told you what you are. And that can be gender, or it can be abuse, it can be many different things. But I think that's got to be part of what education has to do.
Let's have one more question, and then we'll adjourn to the lobby.
At the end of the book, I remember thinking how extraordinary your journey was, but not just your journey, your other members of your family. If I recall, you have 2 siblings who were also doctorates. And despite it all, your parents built this incredible, successful business. I'm wondering whether you, either with yourself or perhaps in conversation with your siblings, have ever talked or considered how your educational journeys might have been had not required transcending so much from this very cloistered and contained environment.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Tyler and Richard, if you met them, they were just going to be that. I just think they could have been born in a hole and never let out ever. And the second they were out, they'd be like, "Where's a science book?" Like, they'd be like, "The sun is very bright. I need a science book." They were just like that, and they were going to be like that, I think, no matter what. Richard probably needed a little more help to actually have the confidence to do all that he was capable of doing, because he was incredibly smart but never saw that in himself, I don't think. So I don't know. I mean, of the 3 of us, I feel a little bit more like the odd one out. I don't think I was like that. I do feel like I was pretty lucky, and if Tyler hadn't come back and said, "I think this is the wrong place for you," I'm not sure what I would have done. I definitely didn't sit in the basement like Richard did and hide under the sofa and read the encyclopedia. That never happened. Once. It might have happened once and then never again, because I realized this is so boring. And I didn't teach myself calculus like Tyler did and get a nearly perfect score on the ACT. I just didn't do that. So I don't know. I kind of feel like they were just freaks and they were going to do that. And I don't know what happened with me. I've written a whole book about it and I have no idea. That's not an inspiring ending. I've had better endings.
Well, let's not think of it as an ending. There's books in the lobby, and the Hammer always does beautiful tea and coffee and cookies, and Tara will talk while signing books, or just she'll talk. So let's all meet up in the lobby. Thank you very much.